Today, on Be Something Wonderful, assuming and occupying your state of wish fulfilled. Here's the secret. I am your host, Tom Kearin, and this is the Be Something Wonderful studio of higher consciousness, where we help you level up and become the best version of yourself. Creators, welcome back. Here we are in Lima, Peru, but we are leaving later today to head to Cusco, the gateway to Machu Picchu. So look for more powerful content starting tomorrow from Cusco. Guys, welcome, and I just want to say good morning. And there was a powerful series of sessions yesterday. I want to talk about a few of them that hit this same idea of, Tom, what really is, and one of the sessions specifically, he said, Tom, what's really the secret of occupying and assuming the state of wish fulfilled? Right? This is always the question, right? Because we feel like we're bouncing out of it, we're in it, and then we're bouncing out of it. I really want to hit this because remember, it's always about returning to it. We're always talking about frequency, returning to that assumption, returning to that occupation of your desired end, right? Yes, you're going to imagine it, you're going to affirm it. You're going to do a state of, you might imagine it, the image or an imaginal act as you fall asleep in a state akin to sleep. But it's always the idea that in that background, you have a slide, an image. You're lighting up that future, you're lighting up that imagined end and returning to it over and over again. This is really what Jesus got at when he talked about 70 times 7. How often should you forgive your brother? And he says, I didn't say 7 times, I said 70 times 7, meaning continual forgiveness of sin. Or what does that really mean? Continually returning to identifying with your ideal, your imagined end. And the greater meaning of that is identifying with your I am. Remember, your I am is untouched by all those outer physical conditions that you believe are so real. And it's untouched, it's untainted, it's unchanged by the inner conditions of your thoughts and your feelings and your assumptions and your limiting assumptions about those conditions. Do you see it? It's untouched by the messy middle, right? So I want to hit this. Therefore, you shall be perfect just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Matthew 5:48. What's Jesus saying there? Jesus is not talking about the imperfect thoughts we have, the imperfect assumptions, the limiting beliefs, right? Or the outer conditions that are imperfect and changing. He's not talking about that. He's talking about I am. Jesus, remember, represents your I am. That I am is perfect. It's untouched. It's unchanged. It's forever untainted by the prevailing conditions, the temporary thoughts and feelings or the temporary manifested conditions. Those are always changing, but your I am never changes. That I am represents, in the highest sense, your ideal reality, your ideal assumption. Right? I am is perfect faith. Right? You can say, I am this, or I am that, or I am not this, or I am not that, and doubt it. But you can't say, I am, and doubt it, or fear it, or have any other thought but completion in unity with the love that you are. That's powerful. So I am is perfect faith. You can doubt and fear temporary changing outer conditions, these 3D manifested physical world conditions, and the inner conditions, your thoughts and feelings and limiting assumptions and your reactions to those conditions. But you can never doubt I am. That's true meaning of forgiveness, right? That's why Jesus talks about 70 times 7. We're going to get at that. But that's really the idea of continual forgiveness of sin. There is no limit to the amount of times you return to that assumption, to your desired end, to the occupation of your wish fulfilled, right? That's the true meaning of being in the Sabbath, right? You're there and you continually return there, right? So, in other words, you can doubt I am this or I am that, or I am not this or that, but I am is perfect faith. It's absolute conviction. That's the feeling of fulfillment, of wish fulfilled. That's the feeling that Neville, Goddard, and other teachers are talking about. The feeling is a conviction. It's absolute faith that you are that which you assume, that there are no facts outside of what you declare. There's no truth outside of what you decide. There's no reality outside of who you and what you're conscious of being. That's I am. And it is realized, it's recognized, and it's manifested in 3D reality by continually identifying with your ideal, your wish already fulfilled. That's the true meaning of continual forgiveness of sin. Forgiving yourself and others for your imperfect seeing, for that imperfect perception. For looking at that 0.00001% of manifested physical reality and identifying with it as who you are. Right? As the ultimate reality. Remember, it's seeing the greater reality behind all conditions, both outer conditions of those manifested, what look like solid reality or conditions, and the inner conditions, your reactions and your feelings and your thoughts about it. It's forgiving all of that. That's all in complete seeing, right? So, Lord, this is what Peter asked Jesus, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? In other words, how often do I forgive myself and others for seeing only that partial seeing of them, that only 0.0001% of physical manifested reality? How often should I forgive that and see that greater reality behind it? Up to 7 times? And remember, 7 in Scripture, it has a big meaning. It's used hundreds of times. It means complete. It's done. It's yours. That's what 7 means, right? So when is it going to be complete? After 7 times? Am I done? I forgive them once. I'm in fulfillment. And then I see something that I don't like or is unwanted or I judge negative. Then I'm back again. How often should I forgive that? Well, remember, this is it. We're talking about this 0.001% of physical manifest reality. You want to see that whole reality, and it's a continual forgiveness of sin. That's the message from Jesus. I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Right? And remember, Jesus is not saying 490 times and you're done. 490 represents the absolute perfection. It represents the absolute forgiveness. It represents that absolute perfection of all there is. The unity of God, the unity of that love, right? 70 times 7. Remember, Hebrew is alphanumeric. Each letter in the Hebrew alphabet has a numeric value, each word or letter, right? So let's hit this. So 490, 70 times 7 adds up to 490. That number represents the word tamen in Hebrew, meaning complete, perfect, finished, ultimate perfection. Be perfect as your Father is perfect in heaven. That's the message, right? It's not to say, remember, it's to say that those conditions that you're seeing are not the entire reality. It's not the entire picture, right? When you withhold forgiveness, in other words, when you don't identify with your assumed end, when you look at others as something other than that ideal love and that ideal perfection, when you look at others and believe that they're affecting your reality, that they're keeping, that they're the reason you're not getting what you want, you're withholding forgiveness. You're identifying with the imperfect or the separation, or you're dividing up God, right? You're believing that there's not unity. That God can be in pieces, right? And you can't divide up God. You can't divide up love. You can't divide up infinity. You can't divide up ultimate reality. And every part of ultimate reality is the whole, right? It's that holographic nature of that love, of infinity of God. Within every part is the whole. You find God everywhere. God's too big to miss. Fulfillment's too big to miss, right? But so it's identifying with your ideal, assumed end, not identifying with your I am or imagination, your inner perfection. Identify with that. When you're not identifying with that I am, with that greater reality within you, then you're dividing up God, right? You're dividing up that unity, which is impossible, right? So, and then the 70 means ayin, means I. In other words, it means seeing the greater reality in that 0.001% of physical manifested reality. Then it's 70 times, or fix the I with the sword, or 7. 7 Zion representing 7, or 7 representing Zion means sword. Also means sustenance or sustain. So the paradox is that sometimes you have a sword that leads to fulfillment or rest or peace or the Sabbath, right? So it's the I fixed with the sword. When you assume, when you imagine until the I, you assume and you imagine. In other words, you continually return to your assumption. Continually return to your imagined end. No matter what you see, no matter what changing thoughts and feelings or limiting beliefs pop up, right? You assume and you imagine until the I is fixed as though nailed with the sword. Neville Goddard really unpacks this in his teachings, right? And this is and a lot of this is from his teachings and based on his teachings. You assume until the I is fixed as though nailed with a sword. This is what Neville says, right? Then you rest in fulfillment. In other words, you continually identify with your ideal or your spiritual center, right? Until it's fixed, until you're there. Remember, how often do you do that? 490 times? No, continual forgiveness of sin. You're continually fixing that I or seeing that greater reality, right? And resting in fulfillment, right? You're continually imagining it as you would like it to be, knowing that it already is, knowing that that's the only reality. Wow, that's powerful. I'm leaving a link below to a video where I really unpack this, right, this idea. So true forgiveness, Neville says, is complete forgetfulness. In other words, you stop identifying with the unwanted and see, forgive and forget, and see the greater reality. You forgive and forget that 0.001% as the reality, and you see that greater reality. You see your ideal assumed end. Remember when I talked about Solaris and the movie Solaris with Chris Kelvin, and Chris Kelvin finally comes to the realization, his wife who died by suicide, right? And he's been carrying that regret, seeing her like that, right, since she died. He finally comes to the conclusion, I remembered her wrong, and somehow I was wrong about everything. In other words, remember, memories are imaginal acts. Everything is an imaginal act, right? And so when you remember something, you're creating it in that moment. You're remembering it, and if it's not your ideal, if you're not remembering it as you would like to remember it, if you're not revising it according to your ideal now, and so with that I am, or who you are in this present moment, you're remembering it wrong. Right? And then A Course in Miracles says, what is sin except a false idea about who God's Son is? In other words, what is sin? Sin's identifying with that 0.00001% as reality versus just an experience of that reality, of the ultimate reality. Just a temporary condition or form of that greater reality. When you forgive, when you revise, when you remember it differently, in this now moment, you create a new image or imaginal reality that's the only reality. You change all time because there's only the now moment. So when you remember it differently, when you forgive, when you revise, you're changing all of reality from this now moment because there is no linear time. That we invent that. So it's all done in this now moment. So it changes all images. It changes all reality. In every moment, hear this. You're changing everything with your thoughts, feelings, and assumptions. You're changing the past, you're changing the present, you're changing the future, you're changing all time. That's powerful. That's the power of forgiveness, right? And then Vadim Zeland, in his books, talks about it as the awareness center. In other words, your I am is the awareness center. He doesn't use the words I am, but he's talking about that normally our attention, and remember, when he says attention, we're talking about awareness of being, right? Your awareness of being, who you are, that consciousness manifests as attention in 3D reality. And our attention is either on the outer screen of manifested reality, or it's pulled in the inner screen of our thoughts and feelings about it, or some combination thereof. But really, where do you really want it? Because if it's on the outer screen, you're unconscious. You're being driven, you're being moved by these events and circumstances. It's on the inner screen, your thoughts and feelings about it, you're still unconscious. You're being moved by that greater consciousness, by your thoughts and feelings about it. Instead, you want to be in the awareness center. You want to be pointing to your awareness. You want to be the observer of these outer conditions, the observer of these inner conditions. Know that you are not any of these, that your true nature is I am. It's fulfillment. That's your spiritual center. You want to move to that awareness center, right? This is what Benim Zealand says, to wake up in a dream or waking reality, you must pull your attention away from the inner and outer screen and shift it to your awareness center. And the question is always how? Well, that's where the continual forgiveness of sin that Jesus is getting at. It's returning to your knowing, realization that your wish is already fulfilled. Returning to that imagined end. Returning to that fulfillment. Affirming your desired reality in this now moment. Revising any conditions that don't match that, right? You may not agree with them, but you accept them as one quantum possibility, and then you choose again. You identify back again. That's continual forgiveness again. It's constantly choosing again your ideal, moving back to that no matter what the conditions are showing you, right? That's continual forgiveness of sin. That's continually identifying with your ideal, right? That's what we're talking about assuming and occupying the state of your wish fulfilled. That's the secret. That's the secret revealed by the ancients, right? This idea, but that there is no sin. The only sin is not identifying with your ideal, but that's forgiven in every moment. You get to return to it. Remember, it's about frequency, not the length of time, quote time, that you're in fulfillment. It's frequently returning to it, no matter what those conditions are showing you. I am your host, Tom Kearin, and this is the Be Something Wonderful studio of higher consciousness, where we help you level up and become the best version of yourself. Creators, we're headed to Cusco. We'll see you in Cusco for the big video tomorrow. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for liking and sharing, commenting on the videos. Thank you for joining the membership channel. More content coming out on the membership channel. You can find us on Facebook at besomethingwonderful.com/group/besomethingwonderful. That's a group where you can join and share insight and guidance with others and ask for insight and guidance. We also have a page at Be Something Wonderful on Facebook. You can visit that. You can visit us on Instagram and Twitter at Tom Kearin, or just go to our website anytime at tomkearin.com or besomethingwonderful.com. Creators, with great love, with great light, and infinite gratitude, we'll see you in Cusco.